to talk, and you and I have spent some time together over the past because I think we have very similar agendas. Your government's foreign aid, our foundation on things like agriculture and nutrition and lifting people up. And I want to talk, though, today about gender equality. How did you come to this decision that you wanted to support gender equality, and specifically that you wanted to have a cabinet that was 50% women, because that's been transformative?
Well, it was simply understanding, I mean, one of the core pieces of Canada's success in general is that we get the diversity as a source of strength. Having different perspectives, different backgrounds, different origins, different people come together to share the same challenges and find solutions for them has always been a great creative driver, a great driver of solutions. And one of the most obvious diversity plays you have to make is that you have equal representation of men and women. And we had a provincial government a number of years before that had done a 50-50 cabinet in Canada, and I said, well, let's make sure that we do. And I think some of you may remember that I said, why do you do it? Well, because it's 2015. But before it could be 2015, it had to be 2014, 2013, 2012, where I and my team went out and recruited all sorts of great women candidates to run for politics, to convince them to step up, so that we could then choose this extraordinary, merit-based, but diverse cabinet we had. And
was it hard to get women to say, I want to enter politics? Is it different than getting a man to want to enter politics?
When you ask a man if he wants to run for politics, his first question is usually, what took you so long? When you ask a woman, her first question is, really, why me? Or do you think I'm qualified? Or do you really think I should? Or do you think I have a chance? And it typically takes more conversations to try and get over that hump. And then it takes a thoughtful level of, okay, there's going to be a little more challenges on organization maybe, or more challenges on fundraising, and how we actually develop the tools to have that parity is really important. So we're pleased to be sort of modeling that it can be done. But we're also pleased to be pointing out that it leads to great and better decision making. And that's where we're seeing more and more corporate boards and more industries and institutions saying, no, we're going to go for parity, not because it's just the right thing to do, but because it's a smart thing to do.
And tell me about informing your cabinet. How do you think the conversations, I know you haven't run the other one, thank goodness that we've had an all-male cabinet, but how do you think the conversations are different by having women at the table?
Oh, I can tell you. I remember the story of a government in the early 60s where there was a question of, oh yes, no, this woman really should be in cabinet, and the answer was, no, no, no. We already have a woman in cabinet. We don't need a second. And I think one of the things you have when you have a panel with only one woman on it, or a board of directors with only one woman on it, is that woman then has to speak for all women. And what we have now is we have women who speak for their own perspectives, their own experiences that are sufficiently diverse and sufficiently wide-ranging that you do get a fuller perspective on that. And that's something that was a challenge to set up, but it's also a challenge to keep. I mean, we went out and recruited a lot of great young women to run for politics, and they did, and they were successful. And now we're having a bit of a challenge, not a huge challenge, but a bit of a challenge around retention. As people are realizing that, wow, this is a really nasty place to work. There's a lot of things that, parliaments are built for elderly white grandpas, right? That's the way things historically went. And to have young women one of our ministers has just announced that she's pregnant. She's going to have a baby in March, which we're really excited about, but it's bringing a whole new and important level of conversations about how we make sure that we're enabling her to continue to do her job but to be a great mom at the same time. And those are way overdue, and we wouldn't be having them if we hadn't pushed the envelope on the dynamic.
You're also role modeling. I mean, you're role modeling not just for other Canadian citizens and for other young girls that they could be part of government or part of a corporate board. You're really role modeling for the world. And do you think about that a little bit in the back of your mind? And what, I mean, you grew up and you certainly had role models you looked up to in politics, I would assume. And so how do you think about that role modeling and how important it is or isn't?
It obviously is something important. If I can challenge people to not just see, oh, this is what you want to do if you want to get invited onto panels like this. It's what you want to do if you want to be successful. It's what you want to do if you truly want to create growth that works for everyone and include everyone in the economic opportunities we have. But that, I mean, I grew up with role models. My dad was an amazing role model in his fight for rights. You couldn't call him a feminist, right? Yeah. And I remember from university when I was involved in the McGill Debating Union and then got involved in the Sexual Assault Center as one of the few male facilitators in their outreach program. I remember having arguments with a colleague of mine who was also a debater about whether a man could be a feminist. And I said, well, I think I can, I think I am. And she said, no, only women can be feminists. You can be supportive or you can be an ally, but it's our thing. And that, 20, 25 years ago, that was certainly a stronger perspective, but still people have it. And there's a lot of room to have discussions around this. And for me, even with where I was comfortable with the idea of being a feminist, I didn't actually come out and openly say that I was a feminist until, and I actually haven't ever told this story before, I saw a video in 2014 of Joseph Gordon-Levitt looking at the camera and saying, yeah, I'm a feminist. And I think men can be feminists, it's important. Wow. And it wasn't that, oh, I'm going to follow his lead. It was like, oh, okay. It's okay for men to say that they're feminists in a public sense. Great, I'm going to finally do that. And I think it's important that we all remember that if there is an imbalance, which there is, of men having more strength and more weight to their words in an unfair way, then men have to be part of the solution in using that weight and strength that they were unfairly given to realign the balance. And that's why I will keep saying I'm a feminist until, as you say, it's met with, yeah, we know that, move on, that's not a big deal anymore.
You know, I think it's great that you're not only role modeling it for men, you are also role modeling it, though, for women. Because I know the first time I was asked about whether I was a feminist, I was 29, and I had to really stop and think about it. And I wasn't quite ready to take on that moniker. And we hear that from young women today. And yet when they start to lean into it and see the positive aspects of it, they do decide, hey, I am a feminist. I am for all women around the world, if that's what it means.
Yeah, and there's so many academic differences and definitions and the waves and this and that. I try not to get too bogged down in that, although some people are happy in there. I just think that there is a reclaiming of that word in a good way that is not exclusive, is not about bashing the other sex. It's about saying no, we stand for equality, and we know there's a lot of work still to do. If you believe those two things, then you get to be a feminist, and that's the approach that I'll take on it. And quite frankly, I think one of the things we're seeing, and I was talking about this a few weeks ago with someone who was telling me about their daughter who didn't see the need to define themselves as a feminist, they didn't want to. And then the current political context in the United States has had them decide to step up and be more vocal and realize, oh, we can't take things for granted and we need to continue to fight for rights. And I think that's a great thing.
You've been, besides being, I'll say, an active feminist, a vocal feminist, you've also been involved in youth movements long before you came into this role. Tell us about what you saw in the power of those youth movements and why you decided to get involved in those.
Young people in general would get a bad rap for being disconnected and apathetic and disengaged. And that's sort of the reputation they had because they didn't get involved in politics all that much. But if you actually have a conversation with young people, you realize that yes, there can be cynicism and apathy and disconnectedness, but it didn't come from not caring about the world. It often came from caring so much and being frustrated that they weren't given the opportunity or the tools to weigh in. So I was involved for many years years actually before getting into politics, and it's part of what drew me into politics, in National Youth Service program in Canada, where we took young people and gave them the tools to discover that they can shape through volunteer service communities right across the country and develop and learn and grow and discover that they can have a tangible impact, not as leaders tomorrow when eventually they become successful in the world and get through a career, but leaders immediately with the choices they make, with the energy they have, with what they do. So reflecting on the fact that young people want to be involved, but never really thought of politics as a useful way of making much change at all, we decided to turn that around and show that politics could be a very powerful driver of positive impact on the things that young people care about, whether it's diversity or the environment or progressive growth, those kinds of things, that giving everyone a fair chance, or technology and net neutrality and those kinds of things. When you reach out to young people about the things they care about and you give them a voice and you give them weight to that voice, you get great things.
Well, and part of what we're trying to do today with Goalkeepers is really to have young people understand what amazing leaders they can be in the world, and that if we're going to accomplish these goals that the United Nations and you were part of setting out for 2030, we need them to use their voice and their platforms. Just bringing these two ideas together of youth movements and women, you've also been supporters of women's movements. Tell me how you came to that decision for yourself.
Well, more specifically, in the choices we make as a government around development aid, we move forward with a feminist international assistance policy that recognizes that the best way to affect real change in struggling or developing communities is to empower women. And that means, as you said, that 95% of our development aid in the coming years will be on gender equality or women's supportive programs. But more specifically, a conversation I had with someone who I think was here today, Lima Bowie, talking about how empowering grassroots women's organizations in developing world communities is the best lever to having real transformative impact. I think we all know that there's been billions, trillions of dollars over the past decades flown in foreign aid that gets ending up in big organizations or trickle down through various governments that are not always as transparent and rigorous as we'd like with the aid dollars. And realizing that we can't just keep throwing money at things the same way, but we really need to figure out how to make the biggest difference, to stretch our aid dollars as far as possible. Putting it in the hands of local grassroots women's organizations is the most powerful way to do it. And that's why Canada just recently announced, as part of our Feminist International Development Policy, a $150 million investment in grassroots women organizations, which is
really incredible. So while Lima was here on stage earlier this morning, she also challenged us as a foundation.
Because she challenged us to do exactly that, and we did. It was directly from her.
She's a very powerful voice and advocate, and I think what she said was so powerful, just what you said, which is they know their community. They know what needs to get done. So with the foundation, what Bill and I have decided to do is that an $80 million commitment we made last year to women and girls, we're going to put $20 million of that now behind women's grassroots movements.
Bravo.
You've been around the world, you've been around amazing leaders, you've been around youth, you've been in local communities. What do you want this group to know when you look out as a global leader at 2030? What do you want them to think about or know is possible?
I think everything is possible. I mean, the drive, the awareness, the hopefulness, the positivity, the optimism, the confidence we see out there, even with the challenges, the anxiety, the worries, the setbacks we have, I feel incredibly optimistic about the future because I have spent so much time talking to young people, activists, citizens who are aware that we have so many more levers to impact change in the world now than we ever have before. And I think that's really sort of the core core issue for me is, I mean, so much of politics and so much of advertising consists of dumbing down the message. You play for the anger of the left, or you play on the fear of the right, and you simplify to the smallest soundbite some emotional way to get people to vote or to purchase or to participate. And instead, if you actually have thoughtful conversations about the difficult challenges we're facing, if you appeal to voters' reasonableness and intelligence, if you reach out to citizens as thoughtful agents of change within their neighborhood, within their community, that is where